Hello and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast, midday movie babble break, part of aGliff 33, Prism. My name is Will Lindis, and I'm one of the co-hosts here with the Movie Bears podcast, and you might be wondering, what the heck is a movie bear? Well, I got the answer for you. We are a group of husky, hairy, huggable homosexuals who love talking about film and with the people that make those films. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Jim Pugliafico.
Hey, Will, thanks a lot. We're really excited to be joined by our guests for today's midday movie babble break. And now the person with probably the most hard to pronounce name is going to try to pronounce everybody else's name. For our films today, we have from Shear Avory, to be continued, Abram Cerda. Hi, Abram. And from Babydyke, we have Tone Ottilie. And from Orin Anto, we have Michael Achtman.
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
We've got three amazing filmmakers from three amazing films. And what's exciting for us is we get to spend the next 30, 45 minutes just pelting them with question after question. We've got a few of those lined up of our own, but anyone that is watching live right now, if you've got a question for one of these filmmakers, just put it into the chat function that you have within the Eventive, and we'll see the questions and we'll ask that question on your behalf. But we're going to dive in with our own questions first, and I want to start off with Abram Cerda, who is the director and producer, I believe, for Shear Avory, To Be Continued, which is part of the documentary shorts lineup. So, Abram, first of all, welcome. Hello. Glad to have you here with us today. I want to talk to you a little bit about Shear themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about how you met them, how you decided to make a film about their story and these very pivotal moments in this stage in their life?
Well, thank you for using the correct pronouns, first of all. I find that even in LGBTQ spaces, sometimes people just skip over their or gender neutral pronouns, and I'm like, it's a thing. Like, these are our spaces. But thank you so much for having us and having us in this interview as well. This is so cool and cute. I've never done anything like this. So Shear and I met actually when I was in film school. I did like a summer-long internship at Outfest, the LGBTQ film festival in Los Angeles. And so I was 20 years old, I think, and Shear was 15. And so Shear was volunteering, and I just somebody asked me to drive Shear home because Shear was at the time staying, in the valley, kind of near where I lived. So that's how we connected. And then a year and a half later, when I decided I wanted to do documentary as a concentration in film school, I was really fascinated with gender nonconforming identity, because at the time, this was 2014, folks really weren't informed or really respectful of gender fluidity, gender nonconformity, as being one part of this umbrella of trans identity. And so I was really so I started doing an interview series, basically, and Shear was the second person that I interviewed for the project. And Shear is a producer on the project. I did everything else, but Shear, wrote it and produced it in kind of an amazing way. Shear just really took charge as soon as we started filming, and Shear would just send me their schedule for the week and was like, I'm going through XYZ and it needs to be documented. People need to see that this is what my lived experience is like. And not just, people like us who aren't part of the trans community or who don't face adversity, but Shear was like, this film or whatever this is, because we were trying to figure out, is this a film, is this like a docu-series, what is this? I had a DSLR, I was 21 years old, and I was just following them with the camera, and Shear was just like, people like me, like young people who are trans, who are Black, who are of color need a model for survival, because they're not represented in media. They're not represented in LGBTQ media. If there are docs about trans folks or queer people of color, they're made by white people. They're made by white cis queer people, and there's so much nuance that's missed, you know, when that happens over and over again. So Sheer, yeah, I mean, Sheer was just like, let's make this film together. And yeah, that's what happened.
That's so wonderful. That's so wonderful that Shear got to be, as a producer, get to be a part of telling their own story. That's so important.
It's how it should be. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the name in the producer slot, and I'm like, wow, I bet there's a story there. I mean, we see Sheer at 17, I think, 17 years old in the film.
Yeah.
But I can tell you what jumps out at viewers, especially me, is that they project strongly as someone much more mature in intelligence, attitudes, and behaviors than just about any other teenager that I would have ever met. So being only 17 while transitioning means that their mother, Amber, still plays a part in their life as Sheer approaches, but isn't quite legally an adult yet. Was there any challenges in including Amber in the film?
That's a good question, but actually, no. I love Amber. I have an amazing relationship with Amber, who's Sheer's mom. She's like one of my favorite people on the planet. She was incredibly supportive throughout the entire time of filming. Before I could even film, I had to get her permission.
Right.
And I first had her verbal permission, and then she took it back because her and Sheer would get into these, fights and arguments and disagreements. And then, Amber and I developed a relationship, and she was like, I trust you. And she gave me written permission to make the film, even though ultimately it was always up to Sheer.
Right.
But it's so funny and affirming that you said that, Sheer being 17 and acting and just like being this adult. It was one of the biggest challenges in the edit. And I hate title cards. I think they're so lazy, but I felt I really needed to put the title card that Sheer is 17 years old at the beginning of the film, because otherwise people were like, oh, how old are they? Like 22, 23? And I was like, no, one of the most important parts of following Sheer's story is that this person has had to navigate the world as a fully functioning adult, not since Sheer was 17, but since Sheer was 13, since Sheer navigated in and out of being in the foster care system and, being homeless as a teenager, living in hotels and, having to conduct themselves as an adult just in order to survive. They didn't really get a childhood.
Yeah. And that may be part of why, she, has matured beyond, or that they have matured beyond their age at this point,
Yeah.
And the film ends, obviously, when you're telling about the story of someone's transition, you can't follow them around for the entire decades and decades and decades of their life, because, obviously transition is not just a pivotal moment in time. It's a process, but we do get to see a zoom in on a very, very important part of Shear's transition. And that's the moment where they feel that they are on the cusp of, I have to do this on my own. I have to kind of take charge of my own independence. I have to take charge of my own transition and move forward. And that's where we end within the film itself. But I've now grown attached to Sheer as someone who watched the film and enjoyed it quite a bit. And I wonder if you can give us a bit of an update. Like, what's Sheer doing now? How the last however long it's been since the final day of shooting, what's going on now?
Right. Oh my gosh, y'all are gonna gag. So that that last scene was shot in January of like 2015, I think. It was years ago. It was 5 years ago.
Oh wow.
So Sheer's 21 now. They're doing really well. They work full time for the office of the New York Public Advocate. I'm trying to get it right because it's like, a different world from, how I operate in it. They're a policy advocate. They like write policies for the city of New York. And Shear, what really isn't captured in the film is Shear's actually like a really prominent activist and has been an activist since they were 13. They were doing speeches for like, you know, Mackenzie Baker, the LGBT Center, like all these huge organizations since Shear was like 13 years old. And their mom would like meet them at these different events and like watch them speak about, you know, their experience and whatnot growing up. So yeah, Shear has their own career and like amazing accomplishments. Like you can Google Shear and like Shear's been on TV and on the news like a million times. But yeah, that's where they are now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's great to hear. Because, you know, in the film, sometimes it maybe appears like things are a little bit touch and go. The film begins with a very tense, upsetting encounter with what appears to be transphobia, general meanness directed at Shear at a park near where they live. Very tense scene for a documentary.
That was the first thing I shot.
Yeah, it seems so traumatic, not only for Shear, but maybe for the film crew that was there also. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that from your filmmaker perspective?
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking. Thank you for watching the film. I'm like, you know, it's like, I've been editing this thing for 5 years. So if one person watches it, I'm like, oh my God, thank you.
Worth watching.
Yeah, thank you. That scene was really hard. It was really hard. It was the second day I ever filmed with Shear, so I didn't expect that to happen. And it was really awkward and weird to navigate because the photographer, the only person ever filming throughout this whole thing was just me. But when me and Shear started filming, that photographer wanted to make a documentary about Shear. But the documentary is the photographer was kind of problematic and really kind of pushy on Shear to make a film with them. And so the photographer actually kind of brought them into that situation at the park. Yeah, so it's weird. It's weird and tricky to navigate. It was, it was hard and just tricky. I don't feel, as I was filming in that scene, and just for context for folks listening who haven't seen it, Shear was being photographed in a park for like a calendar. We all actually get chased out of the park by like a group of men who are in the park, just hanging out. And it was just like a very transphobic, like, get out of here. You don't belong here. The dialogue actually cut out that they said was like, go back to Hollywood. Like, you're not welcome here, like freak. And, so the situation's multi-layered. But no, I didn't feel like there was a threat of violence. I just thought it was, they just felt like, well, actually it's multi-layered, sorry. They had said that the reason why they reacted like that was because I was filming. They didn't want to be filmed. They were in the background of the shots as we were filming. And so I think, it's hard when you're shooting a documentary and other people, obviously you pass by other people that you haven't communicated, like, hey, we're shooting a doc. And so, yeah, the whole situation was just so multi-layered. They were, violently trying to get this trans person out of their space, but then also they were like, oh, what's going on? Some Hollywood documentary production. Like, they felt invaded.
Okay.
Yeah,
it was really tense in the film. So thank you for sharing what that was like.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing your film to us. We had a blast watching Shear Avory, to be continued. As a reminder for everyone, it's part of the documentary films lineup. So if you're looking for it, you can see it by name, of course, but you can also see it as part of that documentary lineup, and check it out. You absolutely should. Next up, I want to talk about Babydyke, which is part of the International Shorts lineup. And joining us, we have writer and director Tone Ottilie. So first of all, before I go into the questions, I do want to flag something up. It was announced that Babydyke actually took jury prize for Best Narrative Shorts. So I wanted to say congratulations on that. And Tone,
thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Tona, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this story?
Yeah, I came up with the idea for Babydyke when I was, I think, 20, and I've been spending like a lot of years, probably since I was like in the queer scene in Denmark, and going through a lot of like drama and all these weird, very intense like interpersonal relationships, and also this whole discussion on identity and how everything is so political, and the personal becomes political, and that can get very tricky, and you can really hurt each other. And I think I also wanted to make a story about letting go, and social expectations, and I just like happened to have all that happen to me in the queer scene very much. And I kind of wanted to explore the way that we can sometimes accidentally like hurt each other with norms within the queer scene. And also I was just really fascinating by like queers and lesbians in Copenhagen. I think they're awesome, and I just wanted to put my friends in front of the camera. I think, yeah, the original screenplay was actually it was just like a bunch of dyke friends having a fight in a 7-Eleven, and I sent that into the Film Institute, and they told me, they were like, "Tona, this is not a film." And they told me to collaborate with a writer. They were like, "You have 4 weeks to find a writer who can help you figure out what it is you want to tell." And so I had a really wonderful co-writer who helped me kind of unfold the story.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a great story. Going from not a film to jury prize in that short period of time. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. In the story, Freda lives with her well-meaning older sister, I think,
Yes.
kind of as sort of a role model, confidant, protector, but also has that kind of antagonistic edge that kind of a sibling, relationship sometimes have, right? Can you talk about how you portrayed that relationship as both benefiting Freda and hindering her also?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was really I've always been fascinated by sibling dynamics. I have a really close younger brother. He's 1.5 years younger than me. And the way that you like really, really love each other, and you also mirror each other. And you can also be each other's greatest opponents, also because you know exactly where to press to hurt the other person, and you don't have the same boundaries with your siblings. You can really humiliate each other because you know they're always going to be there somehow. I love my brother. I wouldn't do anything to humiliate him ever, but
you wouldn't write something on his forehead,
I would not do so. But I think because I wanted to tell a story about toxicity and people who violate each other's boundaries and identities in the queer scene, and I feel like, I mean, in retrospect, because it was of course just like an intuitive decision when we were writing, but in retrospect, I think sibling dynamics was just a really good vehicle to tell that story, because you get so much freedom because siblings can do anything.
Yeah.
But it was really hard in the editing, I remember, because everyone kept being, every time we showed them a cut, they'd be like, "Why is the older sister to show?" Because in real life, these two actors, they just loved each other. Like the youngest really, really looked up to the oldest, and still mirrors their fashion style to this day. So yeah, we really worked in the editing with trying to make the older sister nicer and more like, to make it more obvious that she's doing what she's doing out of like insecurity.
You had mentioned the younger actress, the one that plays Freda, and that's Anna Streitz. And so there's something about her that I think is so, I mean, obviously she's the lead of the story, so of course she's going to carry a lot of weight, but I think
Yeah.
very specifically to me, she has to really wear two hats, because this is someone who is, they're already comfortable enough in their sexuality and that they know who they are as a person and they know what they like. You know, they've gone through that part of their journey. And yet at the same time, when she's around all of her sister's friends and that entire group, she feels like a fish out of water, because she's the inexperienced gay. She is the one who doesn't quite have the same number of like connections and lived experience. And I thought that that was really interesting, that she had to be both comfortable in her own skin and also fish out of water at the same time.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of both casting Anna and working with her to get that performance?
Yeah, 100%. First, I want to mention to what you say. I think that's a really cool thing that you say that, because to me that's what the film is about. It's like, one thing is knowing you're gay, another thing is constructing your identity in a queer world, where there's this whole like vocabulary and way of seeing the world that you don't necessarily know how to use just because you've fallen in love with someone of your own gender. And Fred, I think, is using the strategy of just being like, me, I'm just gonna be myself and be normal. And it's kind of like the sisters friend group, these more experienced queers who've kind of seen the world and experienced oppression and haven't just had a girlfriend for a week. They're like, wake up to reality, but they're also enforcing their own norms. Anyway, I think that was interesting to talk about. Casting Fred, I got really lucky. When I met Anna, we were doing like casting rounds, and I used a lot of like internet spaces for like queer people and lesbians in Denmark. Just wrote out online, and then this girl came to the casting but was too nervous, so she brought her friend who was Fred, or Anna, who ended up playing Fred.
Wow.
And she'd never been in a movie before or acted, but I just saw her online and I was just blown away just from saying hello to her on Skype. I was like, that's her. And she actually said no to the project, and she was like, nah, I don't want to do that. And I called her up and like talked to her into like, please do it. And now we actually were shooting a new film together in 5 weeks.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and she's 19 now.
Wow, that's great. She seems like such a natural, you know, she seems like such a natural. And especially in, you know, a lot of the film takes place, or a good portion of the film takes place at a dance called Harem, which seems like a pretty banging party to me. And it takes place kind of near where Freda and her sister live. And in spite of the loud music, bodies dancing, dark, cramped space, there are some incredibly subtle moments with Freda that come across in those scenes wonderfully. It doesn't seem easy from a filmmaker's perspective to do that. Can you talk about shooting in that environment, and was that difficult?
Yes, that was very difficult, because we actually we had like a real techno party, because I wanted it to feel authentic. So we shot the whole thing with no sound, and we spent, I swear, like 6 months in post sound, mostly on that party. You should really hear it in the cinema, because we've done like some cool stuff with the surround and the way it opens up in the 6 different channels. Anyway, we had like a real party with drunk people. There was this dude who kept hitting on me when I was directing it, because he didn't know we were shooting a film. He was just like, do you come here often? And I was like, I'm standing in front of a monitor, dude, and it was just loud techno. And I had like, I think this meant another take, because I was like communicating from across the dance floor, and just like taking the actors out in the bathroom, where I was like shouting directions at them, and then out again to the dance floor. But we made like an open call to the queer scene. We just put it online. We were like, hey, queers of Copenhagen, there's going to be free food and free beers. Do you want to be in a film?
Oh, wow.
And people just showed up. It was amazing. Such a gift.
Oh my gosh, it absolutely sounds like it, and your film is a gift too. Tone, thank you so much for bringing us Babydyke, and for sharing some time to answer some questions with us. I've had a blast, and I'd love to spend more time with you, but I have one more film I need to talk about, and it's one I'm excited to talk about too. I've got Orin and Anto on deck next. And we have Michael Achtman, who is writer and director of this one, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. So with your question, the first question I've got for you, I kind of want to jump to the end. So bear with me for kind of going in reverse order. But there's this moment more towards the end of your film that really sums up what I would almost call like the thesis statement of this interaction, these two ships passing in the night between Orin and Anto themselves. And it's when we get these two different generations of queer people, one who survived the AIDS crisis, while another one is a younger non-binary person who is more representative of sort of like the shifting definition of what it means to be queer in 2020 or kind of modern times. And the film really makes a point about how important it is to respect those that came before while also making room for those that are coming up now, and that space is important on both sides. Can you talk a little bit about this theme, how you represented it in your short, and sort of how you built the story out from there?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, because that's really well spoken in terms of bringing, the themes that I was hoping are in the film together. I sort of brought those characters were both written. I'm working on a feature script, and those are both minor characters in the feature script who never meet in the feature script. And I had this idea of making some shorts to develop the feature and develop the characters, so they don't actually meet. And then I thought of bringing them together. And then once I thought of bringing them together, that was when I started really being tuned into this kind of, well, I call it a bit of a generation gap, or the kind of the tension within the queer community of younger people and older people, of non-binary people and gay people and lesbian people. And so I wanted to express that in the film, but I also wanted to hold on to, I didn't want them to be sort of either stereotypes or two-dimensional characters. I wanted to hold on to something of what's making them tick that comes from the other script. So while there is this sort of generational misunderstanding and learning that comes for them, I think I wanted them both to have other things going on in the film that brings them to life.
And in that scene that we're discussing, that section of the film, there's some brutal honesty that comes across in the interaction between the two characters, that the film finally gets down to, what it's really doing. And it just seems to me like it's flat out fantastic writing and character work there, because I really wish other films would include such meaningful bearing of different views and some honesty, the truth, because like in film, while there is an initial sting to some of those words, it can help ultimately build that understanding, which is like kind of opposite of what we do with social media. Social media is all about the sting and less about the understanding, unfortunately. Can you talk about how that idea played into the film, like that, getting to that understanding?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for saying all that as well. I think the trick, I think it's quite tricky to balance the interaction that these two have. And one question that kept coming up for people who don't know is it's two people who are sort of forced to share an Airbnb because of a mistake. So Orin, who's the non-binary character, comes back from a night on the town, and they find that a friend of the person who owns the Airbnb has moved in because he's desperate, and that's Anto. And so some people say, well, why does Orin stay? Would Orin feel safe? So to maintain a kind of balance where Orin would stay, and they get into a lot of conflict there, and it's sort of about, the space becomes a metaphor for it, because it's actually was shot in my flat, and it's a studio flat, but quickly became these areas, which is, whose area is it? And the ownership of the flat and the spaces in the flat sort of became a metaphor for the ownership of the within the community, of space within the community. So yeah, but it was important to me that they do, that within this night that they spend together, and it sort of tells the story over one night, that they do find some understanding. I thought it would be too bleak, and against the purpose of what I was hoping for if they either, if one of them actually left or if they ended up not speaking altogether through it. So I wanted to show that kind of understanding. And I think, when I was doing more research and talking to a lot of people about where is this conflict grounded? Why does the older generation seem to have a lack of respect for, more fluid gender and sexual fluidity? And why does the younger generation have this kind of conflict with the older generation? A lot of it came to be just from, which it always is with, any kind of prejudice or intolerance. A lot of it was just familiarity and spending the night with somebody and realizing, meeting them on the level that they're just another person or a friend rather than that they represent their identity is a good way to kind of be opened up to somebody else's choices or somebody else's behavior, identity, all that.
And I kind of want to play in that space a little bit more because this is an interesting conversation between two characters who really had no reason to talk with one another except for this one happenstance, this fluke that forces them to share that same space, that conversation space, that physical space. Can you talk, and in some ways it almost feels like it's like it could be like a horror story, like my 1-star Airbnb story of I got there and someone else was there, and yet it turned into this thing that was much more transformative for both of the characters. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of coming up with the Airbnb as the impetus for it, because it's a great little germ for an idea?
Well, that's sort of, that's logistics. And usually I'm thinking about a film and it doesn't actually get going until I find the right set and I find the location to shoot it. That's when it's a big turning point for me. So that was part of the challenge actually, was once I came up with this idea of Airbnb, that I could explore different characters in this longer script by putting them all here. So I have an idea for another one, which is 2 other characters who also share the same Airbnb, and you could use, my flat's gonna get a lot of views.
So that was actually your place. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The film struck me as primarily kind of a light drama piece, you know what I mean? But I did appreciate like the small touches of subtle comedy that come out of this sort of like odd couple relationship between Orin and Anto. And I actually laughed out loud a couple of times, which I was surprised at, especially just the scene of Orin going to bed and lying in bed and watching like this nature documentary of the fish across the screen for some reason was kind of funny to me, as well as him letting in Anto's trick kind of at the end of the film. Just nothing overly jokey, just well-timed, sharp, funny moments. So props to you for all of that. Was there a conscious choice to balance some comedy in the situation? You mentioned you didn't want it to be overly bleak, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that came out. And I think that a lot of the comedy is rooted in Anto's character, and he's a genuinely funny guy, actually, that Brandon is actually a stand-up comic. And so he brought a lot of that to the script. But I think he's also generally, he's a bit of a hot mess at points, but he does have a sense of humor about it, and he's a survivor. And it's that kind of survivor's humor that I think makes him more gentle. And I think his humor was a tactic because some of the things that he does are kind of offensive or insensitive, at least. And I wanted the humor to sort of sell the character a little bit, and I think he does a good job at that. He's from the South. He's from Arkansas. So and he was an actor that I didn't know before, and I was really thrilled to meet him. He seemed perfect for it.
Both of them are wonderful in this piece.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We've got to wrap up here, but before we do, I want to first of all remind everybody that's watching right now, again, whether it be live or whether it be, these recordings are up through Eventive, so you can watch it at any time. All of these are part of the aGliff 33 Prism lineup. Again, we've got Shear Avory to be continued, which is part of documentary shorts lineup. Babydyke, which is part of International Shorts lineup, and Orin Anto, which is part of the Fiction Shorts #1 lineup. check the listings, watch these movies. They're all really, really, really good. You can catch us talking to filmmakers all throughout the festival with the Movie Bears podcast, midday Movie Babble breaks. We've talked with several filmmakers at this point, so just go through the listings, see a movie you like, watch the Q&A with it. Also, don't forget to check out moviebearspodcast.com for more film reviews from the bear perspective. So, on behalf of the Movie Bears podcast and on behalf of aGliff, we want to thank all of our guests today. And I also want to very sincerely thank everyone that is helping to make this festival happen. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. LGBTQ film is very important to me. It's very important to so many people. Representation absolutely matters. And the only way that we can allow artists like the ones we just talked about to make the films that represent us in the way that we do is if we support their film. So thank you for supporting aGliff. Thank you for supporting LGBTQ film.